Awesome. Well, we thought we would partly just start for those of you who this video alone is a little anxiety inducing, having 3 people this close together without masks on. We did just want to let you all know we are fully vaccinated. It is safe. We are okay. We are also in a room by ourselves with the door closed. So my name is Becky Canovan. I'm the Assistant Director of Public Services at the University of Dubuque.
To our who we are slide.
Yes, the slide that we have.
We prepared for that. We made a whole slide for it.
We did. We did.
My name is Sarah Slaughter, and I'm a reference and instruction librarian here.
And I'm Joseph Letriz. I am the Electronic Systems Librarian.
All right. Oops. Moved away.
So at the University of Dubuque, we are a small school. We have approximately 2,400 full-time students. Of that, about 1,800 are in the traditional undergraduate programs. We back our professional programs with the liberal arts core. Professional programs on campus include nursing, aviation. We have students in the DNAS department that end up going on to continuing their research at graduate school, all that fun stuff. There are 5 full-time librarians, us 3 plus 2 others, including the director. Part of what we've built with the university is that information literacy becomes a core facet of the student learning outcomes for all of the different classes that we're involved in. It involves a combination of those core classes, such as research writing, English, as well as a liaison model. So I'm in charge of specific departments and specific research. These 2 also have their own specific departments and researches, as well as the other 2 librarians. So we have our foot in most of the doors, and we get to see a large swath of the students here at the university.
All right. So if you read our session description, we used the word in-between skills, and we sort of mentioned what that was, but I will fill you in some more. But first, maybe if everyone can locate the little, do we all have the raise hand thing? Raise your hand if any of these situations sound kind of familiar to you. You have a student who comes up to the reference desk and they say something like, I wrote this paper and now I need to find sources. Or like, I see a lot of hands going up. Or like, I need a source that backs up this point. And you're like, no, that's backwards. Or like a student just seems to want to find that one source that answers all their questions. Or you help a student find a scholarly source and you just see the intimidation on their faces. They're thinking about the length, the language, the complexity, and they're just kind of freezing up. So if any of those are sounding familiar to you, I hope these in-between skills can be helpful, because I think these are some skills. Somebody might want to make sure they're muted. We're hearing a little like background noise. But so these in-between skills could include things like reading sources, identifying evidence within a source, constructing an argument, and taking good notes. So all those things that happen between getting the assignment and finding the sources and actually putting together the paper. So with our information literacy stuff, we didn't really start out with this being a primary goal of our info lit department. We just kind of realized that we were doing it more and more, especially in some of those introductory core classes. And so while we all teach in our own departments, we also all teach the same classes in the core. And it was mostly in some of those classes where we noticed this was coming up a little bit more, because those courses tend to focus more on introducing students to the content, or on writing and speaking, those kinds of things. So some of these skills that came after the usual library session, where we were focused on finding sources, were kind of getting neglected. And we were leaving out a few steps in the process. And so we kind of noticed that some students were having trouble really making good use of the sources that they were finding. And we all know that information literacy is about a lot more than just finding information. We also need to be able to use it effectively and make sense of it. So we realized that there's a point for us to step in and provide some support and some guidance for students on that. So, and I would argue that that leads to more effective searching for the students as well. So once they have an idea of what they need to find, what they need to do with it, they're better able to recognize that kind of thing when they see it. So
that said, we're going to start out with a section we're calling reading and using sources. And you're going to notice as we talk about these sections, we're going to use specific classes as examples. So you'll see both some of our core classes that are either sometimes required, sometimes have a required library session, that sort of thing, as well as some of the departmental liaison work that we do. You will notice that there is some overlap. And that's on purpose. So we, as Joe and Sarah have already sort of alluded to, we are very lucky to see our students both in core classes and in our departments. And so we do have some one-shot courses, but at least 2 of the courses that you'll be hearing about today, 2 of the core courses and 2 of the liaison courses, we have more than one session. So we recognize that we are very privileged to have that extra time with students, but we do feel like many of these strategies that we're going to talk about and sort of lesson plan pieces that we've used are something you can use in smaller doses, whether that be the reference desk, whether that be in a class, or whether you're creating an online module. So just kind of a heads up that that is something we are aware of, we do recognize, but a lot of these you will see some similar language and some similar strategies throughout these pieces. So the first thing I want to talk about is reading a scholarly study. So just a little bit of background on this assignment. This is in an introductory level, 100 level health wellness sport class. The students are, for this assignment, expected to write an article review of an empirical study. Initially, they were to find an empirical study themselves. And as we started with this assignment, we recognized, the faculty member and I recognized that students are struggling with this assignment without support because many of them are first years who have either never read a scholarly article or may not even be familiar with study design. So we kind of had a lot of things we needed to sort of cover before handing them, like Sarah said, that overwhelming scholarly article that they didn't know how to approach. So I was really excited to hear Laura Saunders talk about this morning, that we are often guest speakers sort of in these classrooms that don't have control over the assignment. And I'm really lucky in this class, the professor and I get along really well, and we were able to recognize after doing this assignment for about 3 years or 4 years that the students were really struggling to find the article as well as then working on reading and comprehension. So we decided to change the assignment a little bit and focus more on the reading and comprehension. So we actually provide 8 articles they can pick from instead of doing the searching. So that's something that we've moved away from because we realized the reading was such an important skill they needed to cover. So this is a 2-day lesson plan. We try to split it up for the students. And the first thing we do is walk through the assignment. The professor is very explicit about what needs to be included, like the participants in the study, what were the results, what were the future implications. So not only do we cover those pieces, but we also talk about, if we're translating for those of us who are not expert researchers, what does it mean for future implications? So in order to do this, we sort of build our own mock study in the classroom, recognizing that we are often 4 weeks into the semester. The students don't know enough about the content to be able to build one in their own content area. So I like to use an example that they might be familiar with, like what is the best cookie recipe, which I did not realize was going to get me in a lot of trouble and a lot of fighting because we have very different ideas about what are the criteria we need to find a good cookie. This semester, because we were talking about people who are at a distance to us, we talked about what are to identify the best shipping methods to send my 3-year-old niece gifts from far away. So we build this study as we go, asking a question, talking about what we would do, because we're trying to build from where the students already know. They use some of these problem-solving methods already, but they may not identify them as a scholarly strategy. So we do all that together. We sort of label each section what it would be in an article so they can understand and see that. And then I show them where to find the linked studies. Before the second session, they just got to bring back the full text. The second day, we talk about API citations, we build those together, but a bulk of the day is talking about that article. So with the article in front of them, we identify all of the titles of these section headers, what they might be subtitled, what they might also be called, because you'll notice very quickly that a method section might be methods or methodology, or procedures or study design. There's lots of different words. Again, those of us who are used to the jargon, we know that all of those mean the same thing. We recognize our students do not know that. So we help do that together. And this is something we usually do on the wall. We're in the classroom we teach in. So usually I put big pieces of paper up on the wall. We do it with markers. During COVID, we've used Padlet, which Sarah will show you in a minute, to sort of do this online. Including those sections like the literature review, which often trips students up because they're almost never labeled that. And then we talk about strategies for what sections to tackle, and the fact that if you're reading as an expert, right, the professor in this class is an expert, he reads the articles front to back. I am not an expert in health, wellness, sport, so I talk about how I often jump to the discussion section to figure out what's important. What did they find? Why are they excited about it? And then I work my way backwards to how did they accomplish that? So showing the students that depending on their comfort or their expertise level, there isn't necessarily a wrong way to read these scholarly articles, but there are a lot of strategies that identifying which sections have the components they need to talk about in their article or in their paper is going to be a really great way to start that. So this is just one of the ways that we show them how to do that. We have taken, especially in the COVID times, taken a print version of an article and sort of annotated it a little bit to talk about what those sections do. That way, when the student actually gets around to doing the assignment the day before it's due, they have that reminder of the stuff that we talked about in class.
All right. So this is a slightly different one. So this is it's still sort of an introductory course. It's not the intro to sociology, but it's a sort of intermediate level course within sociology that a lot of freshmen and sophomores take. So I'm still seeing a lot of students who are inexperienced researchers, especially when it comes to looking for something very particular, which is what this assignment is asking them to do. So for this assignment, the students are creating a presentation on best practices related to children and families, and they actually write out a best practice. Some of the examples of topics that they might come up with are like parents supporting a transgender child in their transition, or how do people escape abusive marriages, things like that. So they need to look for some answers and then convert those into a list of best practices. And the evidence that they use to do that is from trade and scholarly sources. So again, sometimes students might have some experience with scholarly sources. A lot of them haven't really seen much of the trade sources yet. So that's a new thing that we're also bringing into the equation. And when the instructor approached me about this, initially it was just going to be more of a searching day. But as we were discussing it, we talked about how best practices might not be as helpful of a search term as they think it's going to be. If you actually type that in, you might get some stuff because there are definitely articles that have that in the title or something. But a lot of times those professional and scholarly sources are talking about solving problems, advice for handling situations, a different method to use for something, even if they don't necessarily call them best practices, they're still getting at those same ideas. So we decided maybe a good way to approach this would be to spend a little bit more time looking at some examples of best practices and really getting a feel for what they are and what they might look like within the text, so that when students actually got out to do some searching on their own topics, they'd be better equipped to recognize what they needed to find. So this is also a 2-day. So the first day is all just modeling. We kind of do a little bit of talking about topics and figuring out what's going to work or what they might need to narrow down in order to make it work. But most of the day is focused on modeling the process of pulling best practices out of a group of articles. So I bring in some articles on a common topic that we're all going to look at, and I choose one from our profession, which is serving homeless patrons in a public library, because that's one where they don't need to have a whole lot of understanding of, the practices of librarianship in order to kind of envision what that entails. So they all get a bunch of articles on the topic. And when I initially had this, I sort of asked them to find a best practice of the article. But in the last couple semesters, I realized that was maybe ignoring a couple steps that we needed to go back and spend some more time in. So now what we do is after they've skimmed the article, I ask them to look for something, either a challenge or some sort of barrier or solutions to a problem the article is mentioning. And then here's what that looks like. We collect all of their responses up on the board. And this was an example from this past year. So we were, half the class was in the room, half the class was remote. So I used Padlet in order to do this. And I don't know, maybe some of you have used Padlet before, but if you haven't, it was actually a really great kind of virtual whiteboard. It allows you to, people can write their own pieces up on the Padlet once you share the link. And then what I really liked as the instructor is I can move things around. So we kind of had this hodgepodge of a bunch of information from the articles. And then what we did was, as we looked through them, we noticed that a lot of them were talking about some similar ideas. So I was able to visually like reorganize them in the Padlet and see, okay, these are talking about this idea, these are talking about this other idea. And from that, from gathering that evidence and what are some of those barriers or solutions that the articles are talking about, then we can practice converting that into a best practice. So, and then the second day is applying all of that to their own topics. So then they have a chance to do the searching. We talk about keywords, how maybe best practices you can try as a keyword, but don't rely on it. And then they find some of the articles on their chosen topics.
Worldview is one of the required first-year seminar courses that's given here at the university. The students start out in the Worldview 1 course, usually in the fall semester, that has them take a look at their own personal worldview and how they might interact with things, how their experiences might have shaped them into who they are when they get here. Worldview 2 builds upon that by looking at their values in a vocation. In the past, it's involved a service project. Usually the students would go out and volunteer at an organization that we have either ties with on campus, such as the food bank that is actually located in one of the central buildings on campus, or volunteering with a professor on a personal project if they're tied in with something to the community. Sometimes they go to the Dubuque Regional Humane Society and pet the dogs and walk them and play with the cats in order to socialize them and act on some of those values of themselves involved in the community, and also how they might fit in with that within their worldview and things like that. So the session that I really kind of took as my own understands the social issue in a context of what the students might bring into it. And the session that I lead is less focused on an assignment and more around the skills that the students need to bring into it, but also apply and use to successfully just engage within that session. I say that there's not a single assignment because out of the worldview sessions that I taught, out of the 3 professors that I had, there was one assignment for one professor that was a single individual paper that relied on a bunch of different resources that was either provided for them or that they could choose for themselves, depending on their organization. One professor had a single paper that the entire class had worked on and was going to submit at the end of the sessions. And the other professor didn't have any assignment. It was a lot of, we're going to have a discussion at the very end and go into how does this all fit together and things like that. So it was a variety of assignment types and a variety of experiences going into it. A lot of the students, when I would ask them, how would you search for something or how would you use something, had never encountered that concept before. Some of them had written papers before. Some of them were like, what? So I started talking more with the students about engaging with the piece in front of them. A large part of what the articles that we shared with them focused on one of 2 topics. So we examined a different type of source that focused on either food insecurity or brain health within the section. We had some popular articles, so that included like some blogs, an actual website for an organization specifically devoted to talking about one of those topics, as well as scholarly articles to provide more of that depth piece. As I introduced those pieces to them, I constantly tried to reinforce the fact that this is the easiest place for them to practice those skills. A lot of them in their professional programs would expect them to bring those skills with them into writing an observation or an analysis. And this is a low risk, high reward environment for them to say, I can engage with this piece of paper or this website and say, what is it actually trying to tell me? So as I led them through the discussion, and as I either broke them off into pairs, let them read by themselves, honestly, it depended on the temperament of the class. Some were very vocal and willing to participate, and others gave me that stink eye and were like, I'm not even going to try to look at you. I gave them just some key points that they'd want to engage with, because in all of their resources and all of the research that they'd be looking at, not only in this class, but also their other classes, they're going to be asked some of those questions. Who's behind the information? What is it trying to tell me? Like the purpose of it. Why would I trust the information that it's telling me? Or conversely, why would I not trust this information? And then finally, once you understand where that information is coming from, how would you use it in your paper? So in the class that was actually doing the individual paper, part of their piece was actually going through and creating their annotated bibliography. So we actually went through 2 of the sources and how that piece is put together and why it serves a purpose. And I made sure to continually engage with them and say, you may not think this is going to be useful in your assignments, maybe, depending on the course that you go into, but at some point in your career, regardless of you being a pilot, one of my liaison areas is aviation, or going into a field like mathematics or CIS, CIT, which are both other liaison areas of mine. Someone at some point is going to ask you, where did you get this? Why should I believe this? And then also, depending on who they are, can you summarize this information in a way that it makes sense to me? Part of what the skills that I try to get them to go through with that in our discussion is pulling all that information together as quickly as possible, because it's usually only one class, and then telling me all the fun stuff that they learned or didn't learn, like pieces of information that was missing, and how they might find that information later on.
Which actually leads really well into argument construction. So I will start out again. As Joe said, with this Worldview 2 class, there sometimes isn't an assignment, sometimes there is. And so sometimes getting the buy-in is a little bit tough. The same thing is very similar in this class I'm about to talk about, which is a world geography class. This class is probably the other end of the spectrum that Professor Saunders talked about this morning, where this assignment, on more than one occasion, I've talked to this instructor, our person in the academic success center has talked to this instructor, multiple people have talked to this person saying this assignment is too hard, the expectations are too high for an intro level course. The assignment has not changed. So we are just working with what we are given and recognizing that I recognize the students' lack of skill as something that isn't going to change. So trying to give them as many possible tools as they can for this. And I'm sure we have all seen this type of assignment before, where a former colleague of mine called these the 0 to 60 assignments, where the assignment gets assigned and then it's due and there's zero structure in between. So this is a take-home midterm essay test that is full of large open-ended questions. And you may be thinking, Becky, how large are these questions? I brought a sample. This was one used a few years ago. Explain the region of North America in the way it has become what it is today. End of question. Please keep in mind the development of the region that has to do with physical geography, culture, ethnicity, but also its political, economic, and social development. I will remind you, these are 100 level students who have never taken a geography class before and are often taking this as a core credit, not because they are interested in geography. So it is a bit of a balance, a bit of a challenge. Yeah, agree. I am with the yikes and wow. That's exactly what I said. So the students are expected, the instructor expects them to narrow the questions themselves by using a very specific or precise thesis statement that provides the parameters for what I'm going to answer. So to me, this sounds like a much more like a 400 level type of assignment. Again, I am a child of the liberal arts, so I wrote these kinds of essays. However, our students are all in professional, most of them are in professional programs. This is not the type of essay they're seeing in their majors either. And again, students struggle with this as their first years or unaccustomed to this style of essay. So what I do in class, this is part of one session. I'm doing like 4 other things in this class with them, but I recognize this is something the students need because the instructor, the first time I taught this, he sprung this on me in class. So I had to sort of do this on the fly, trying to identify how to give the students the strategy when they have 0 content language to talk about this. I asked them once what country they were picking for their country profile, and one of the students said Rio. And I was like, oh, I gotta back up 8 steps. Okay. So for this one, I model the strategy in class to give the students a structure. I use a sample question, sometimes from the professor, but I have learned, don't ask the professor for a sample question. They're way too hard. So as Sarah's about to talk about later, I pull out my favorite out of my back pocket question: how does sleep impact college students? Because we all know that's something they got opinions about. And we walk through this sort of structure. So in this one, I wanted to point out that the thesis is an answer to their research question, which we talk about in our research writing class, but many of these students have not taken that yet. And that it gives the parameters, it gives them, I always draw on the board, it gives them a box, and you say, there's all of this question I have to answer, I'm going to answer this box size of question. So I remind the students that this is one where they're expected to find outside information, not just from their own knowledge. So this isn't a take-home essay. I keep telling students this is like a take-home paper. It's like a mini paper, and they need to treat it as such. This IELTS session is also weeks before the essays are even assigned. So they're often like not listening, not engaged, because they're like, they don't think it's applicable. So that was why I realized these students needed something to take with them. So I wanted to build this on a model we have seen in other classes. Our basic communication class uses this model. Some of our English, intro to English classes use this model of claim, evidence, and then sort of rationale. And I really wanted to get at this because the professors complain the students either talk just about what they know, or they just cite quotes. There's not that middle point where using the evidence to prove your claim and then explaining in your own words where the rationale is to connect it to the next piece of evidence. And so I wanted to give them that example. And then I got asked in class in another place, we'll talk a little bit more about worksheets. The students asked if there was a place where they could like fill this out themselves. And so my colleague and I created a Word doc format of this so that students could fill it out as they were going to kind of give them an outline structure. And I've ended up using this in lots of other classes and giving it to students at the reference desk when they come up to us when the writing center isn't open or there's not a tutor available because everybody's busy, that I was like, writing is not my strength, but here is a tool to help you get started. So.
Right. So this is a core class that we all kind of teach in. This is a required composition and rhetoric course. And the assignments can vary in this one, but usually each class has one of the final assignments being a paper where it's an argumentative paper where they have to use a variety of scholarly and popular sources. And what's unique about our approach instruction-wise to this one is that this is more of an a la carte menu that instructors can choose between. So we have a day on topics and narrowing, like a brainstorming day. Then we have this reading sources day, which is the one I'm going to talk about. And then there's a searching day. So the instructor can sort of decide which ones they think are most necessary for their class, and depending on their schedule, how many days they can give up, and they can choose how many they want us to do. So this one is, again, another one where we bring in some sources to model, or there have also been variations of this where they had some sources or they had done the searching before this, and then we have them use their own. So it kind of depends on how this particular class is going. But we bring in some articles, and the overarching point of this one is to demonstrate that this process is not as hard as they think it is. So what I have them do when I bring in common articles for all of us to look at is that, kind of like in my social class, actually, we look and see what evidence we have for, usually the question that I use is how does sleep impact college success? So they'll pull out statistics in the article, or they'll note that, this study said that sleep is linked to mental health or things like that. And so we collect all of that information up on the board when it's in person, or I've used the Padlet again when it's online. And based on all the stuff that they put up on the board, again, we can recognize that, a few of these articles both mentioned that sleep impacts academics. So then we know, okay, that's a major theme that we'd want to come up. And once we've summarized those themes, we notice that this is starting to look a lot like an outline. And from that, then we can say, okay, so if this outline, this is our answer to that question, then if we were going to sum this up in one sentence, that's their thesis. So the whole process this is an example. I'm very glad I remembered to take a picture that day of what this can look like. We didn't get quite all the way to the writing the thesis in this one, but they've gathered all this information. We've started summarizing some things up on the board, and it's really to demonstrate that this whole process is not quite as intimidating as they think it is, because again, this is a first year class, and this might be their first time using multiple sources in a research paper.
Which actually leads quite well into the note-taking and organizing. So one of the classes that all of us teach, and is sort of our cornerstone of our information literacy program, and if any of you have heard us present ever before, you've probably heard us talk about this class. It's our Introduction to Research Writing course. In that course, we see students anywhere between 3 to 6 times over the semester. We're embedded in the course, and we walk all the way through the whole research process. You might be wondering, why are we not hearing about this class till the end? Mostly because we use a lot of these same strategies in Res 104 as well, using obviously slightly different models, so we don't do the exact same thing in every class. The reason you're seeing this when it comes to note-taking is because for many students, this is the first time they've written a long research paper over a semester. So it is a 7 to 10 page research paper over the semester. And a lot of these other assignments, like Sarah talked about in Soc 210, or even the assignment in the variety of assignments in Worldview 2, are very short assignments, and they're usually assigned a week or two before they're due. And you can get away without taking notes while you read. It's hard to argue that note taking is important when they've been successful without it. So in this class, we really try to hit the importance of note taking, especially for long projects, because we are seeing these students in weeks 2 and 3 talking about finding sources, but the outline and final draft of the paper aren't due until the end of the semester. So in this class, we review current strategies. So I do always ask, are students actually taking notes? And I am surprised how many of them actually raise their hands. Usually it's like 2 or 3, but in a class of 20, it feels like that's a win. We talk about what are those strategies. I introduce a bunch of new ones. And again, whether that's using something like Padlet, whether that's using note-taking in a notebook, in a Word doc, printing out your articles and putting the notes in the margins. Lots of different ways to do that, but just rattling off some strategies that maybe they haven't heard of. And we do have tutors in our academic success center who are trained in what's called the reading with a red pen strategy for note taking. So again, I'm not trained in that, but I do tell students if they're interested, that's something they might have seen. And students in our introductory courses, sort of our pre-100 level courses, sometimes are introduced to those strategies. So the other thing that I hit very hard in this class is the disadvantage of highlighting, and what that means when you just highlight, because we see that a lot with our students is they highlight, but then I said, how do you know, what are you highlighting? Well, I'm highlighting the important stuff. Well, why is it important? And I'm like, right. So all you're doing is you're just giving yourself a smaller section to reread later when you're writing. So you getting those note-taking strategies out there is really important. And one of the things I mentioned in other places is we have really started to lean into worksheets or visual organizers or graphic organizers, pick your poison, whatever you want to call them, as a way for students to visually organize their notes. And again, we don't require them in any class, but we do provide them in multiple places, including the Reading a Scholarly article. The best practices one in the middle is the one Sarah uses in 210. The social issue research is one that we use in Soc 111. Every step of the process in our research writing class, whether it's keywords, whether it's source evaluation, whatever we're doing, we are providing those worksheets so that students have a way to come back and do this again. We recognize the tool might not work for everybody, but it does really encourage our students and empower our students to find a different way, and recognize that they might have those strategies elsewhere. And if not, this is the time, like Joe said, this is a good time to practice those strategies when it's a little bit lower stakes.
All right, so to sum up, basically our support doesn't have to end with the finding sources. And that's something maybe we had forgotten for a little bit.
Yeah.
And then we realized, oh, there's a need for this. And I jotted down very quickly. I appreciated Dr. Sutter saying, but the quote was, "We could have access to all the information in the world, but if we can't understand it, it's meaningless." I love when keynotes give you a little line that you can use, because I think that really applies to this presentation. And this is also something when you're thinking about, how could I get buy-in from instructors? This might just be something that instructors hadn't thought to ask you about before. Instructors might not realize, one, that it's needed in that particular course, or they just might not realize that it's something that we can do. But it is part of our definitions of information literacy. So as you are reaching out to instructors, you might, we've definitely been advertising it a lot more, like that we can help your students read a scholarly article, and we've gotten a lot more interest that way. So
I definitely saw there were some comments and questions in the chat. I absolutely can dump the worksheets and the structure for the argument in there. I will do that while Sarah and Joe work on some other questions. I will just dump chat links down here in the bottom.
And Becky, we'll probably be requesting your materials for the.
Oh, perfect.
You can-
Good. Well, we can give all of the links.
Yeah, great. So we do have time for maybe one question. That was wonderful, by the way. If anybody has a good single question we can ask our colleagues here. That was a lot to take in.
Yeah, sorry. I will also admit I dropped the link in there for the one worksheet, but I will tell you because this year many of our students were face-to-face, but some of them were online. Most of our resources are somewhere on those research guides. And the courses that we talked about, Research 104, English 101, Worldview 2, World Geography is the one I dropped, and then Soc 210 are the ones in there. So
how did you get 3 to 6 visits in your research writing class?
Yeah.
it does help that information literacy is one of the core learning outcomes.
Yeah. And actually that course was co-developed about between 20 and 25 years ago with a librarian. So they helped build that class. But it helped to have an administrator that was very, very involved in information literacy.
But we did kind of change the model a little bit this last couple year, because some of the classes were maybe not seeing as much interest in some of the days. So we kind of we also reworked it so that 4 of the days were required, or was it 3? I can't remember.
4 of the days are required.
Yeah, 4 of the days were required, and then there were a couple, like 2 supplemental ones.
Yep.
But a lot of them did take us up on at least one of the supplemental ones too.
Yeah.
So-
I'm seeing some questions about advice for note-taking for the students, and also isn't that a personal choice? Yes, I do believe that is a personal choice. However, I usually in that class challenge the students to make sure that that actually works for them. A lot of times our students haven't had the chance, and again, a third of our students are coming in underprepared, a third of our students are first generation students. So our students are often coming in, and I hate using this phrase, but at a deficit. So many of them may not know, they may think that that's what they're supposed to do. They have an idea of what college learning looks like. So part of what we try to do in our classes is to provide and model options for those students, because again, they may not have an idea of what that actually looks like.
And that's definitely something you do in that Res 104 course, is we have them map out their research process, how they've done it in the past, how they do things like take notes, whether they usually do an outline or not. And that class definitely suggests a certain model for them to practice some of those skills. But we also definitely encourage that reflection and trying to decide, okay, so what things are working for you? What isn't working for you?
Yeah.
How can we make that more efficient?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the beauty of having the one librarian to that class that we're embedded. The students feel a little more comfortable coming back to us with those questions. So.
Well, great. I think that's gonna do it, I think. I think we're out of time, so I could extend this if I wanted to, but we have to get prepared for the next breakout
Sure.
session.
Yep. Well, and our
So,
contact info is there and we're easy enough to find. So
Excellent. So thank you very much, Becky, Joseph, and Sarah. We really appreciate you presenting here at the Information Literacy Summit. Again, take their contact information if you want to get it more information and more details about how this works out for them and how it could potentially work out for you. Feel free to reach out to them. And hopefully materials will be presented on the Information Literacy Summit website in the very near future, along with recordings. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and thank you again, Becky, Joseph, and Sarah. Great job.